It started on a quiet afternoon in a small town where nothing ever really happens, until one moment changed everything. An old man, walking slowly down the sidewalk in his faded military jacket, caught the eye of a young patrol officer. The man was in his late 70s, face worn by time and service, his jacket marked with a patch of a war long past. But to this cop, he wasn't a veteran. He was just someone who didn't belong. What followed next wasn't just wrong, it was something that would shake the entire country when the truth came out. The officer, filled with power and prejudice, confronted the old man for no reason. At first, it was just words. Then it turned physical. People watched in disbelief as a man who once risked his life for the country was treated like a criminal in the street he'd lived on for decades. Phones were out, filming, but help didn't come. Not yet. What no one knew was that this old man wasn't just any veteran. He had connections, deep ones, and one of those connections, a 4-star general, a man who had served beside him years ago, who owed his life to the very man being humiliated on that sidewalk. When he saw the footage, he didn't just get angry, he took action. And not just a phone call or a strongly worded letter. No, this general decided to come down himself. What happened next wasn't about violence or revenge. It was about justice, it was about respect, and it was about sending a message to a system that thought it could get away with anything. But what exactly did the general do? How did one man manage to stand up to an entire police department and win? And what happened to the officer who started it all? The answers will shock you, because what came next, no one saw it coming. His name was Thomas Reed. Most people in town just called him Mr. Reed. He kept to himself, always polite, always quiet. You'd never guess by looking at him that he once led soldiers through some of the fiercest battles overseas. A Purple Heart, a Bronze Star, medals that sat dusty on a shelf in his living room. To the neighbors, he was just the kind old man who watered his lawn every morning. To a few who knew better, he was a war hero who had seen more in one lifetime than most could imagine. The young officer, his name was Darren Cole, fresh out of training, full of ego, and quick to judge. That day, he claimed Reed was acting suspicious, whatever that meant. No weapons, no threat, no real reason, just an excuse. Something about Reed's slow walk, his skin, his stare. It was enough for Officer Cole to make a choice that would change both of their lives. He had no idea who he was dealing with. The video of the incident went viral within hours. You could hear people in the background, shocked, some yelling for the officer to stop, others frozen with disbelief. Reed never fought back. He didn't even raise his voice. That quiet dignity, that calm in the storm, made the footage even more powerful. It was painful to watch and impossible to ignore. In a military base 3 states away, General Marcus Donovan was finishing a strategy briefing when his aide handed him a phone. It took him less than a minute to recognize his old friend on the screen. He froze. That wasn't just anyone. That was the man who had saved his life in the middle of a firefight years ago. A man who had once stood between him and a bullet. Now, that same man was being pushed to the ground by someone half his age. Marcus knew he couldn't just sit and watch. This wasn't a moment for press releases or quiet meetings. This was personal. And as the screen faded to black, one thing was clear. General Donovan was going to make this right. But how, and at what cost? By the next morning, the entire town was buzzing. News vans lined the street where it happened. Social media was flooded with the video. People were reposting it with hashtags like ****, hashtag Justice for Reed, ****, and ****, hashtag Veteran Abuse, ****. Some called it a clear case of racial profiling, others a disgrace to law enforcement. The local police department released a short statement saying they were investigating, but it felt more like damage control than action. Officer Cole was placed on administrative leave, but insiders said it was more about keeping him out of the spotlight than holding him accountable. He hadn't apologized. In fact, those close to him said he believed he did nothing wrong. He blamed Reed for not cooperating. What he didn't know was that someone had already begun pulling strings behind the scenes. General Donovan didn't go public. Not yet. Instead, he started contacting people, reporters, retired military officers, civil rights lawyers, even a few people in Congress. He wasn't looking for revenge. He was building a case. Quietly, strategically, every decision was deliberate. He didn't want chaos. He wanted the truth exposed in a way no one could ignore or twist. He also knew time was running out. The longer things dragged on, the easier it would be for the police department to bury the story under bureaucracy. Meanwhile, the town itself was splitting. Some folks supported Reed openly, placing flags on their lawns, organizing peaceful gatherings. Others defended Officer Cole, claiming the video didn't tell the whole story. Tensions rose. You could feel it in the air. At the diner, in the school hallways, even in Sunday sermons, everyone had something to say, and not everyone agreed. What made it worse was that Reed still refused to speak to the media. He stayed home, recovering, quiet as ever. Some said he didn't want attention. Others believed he was waiting. For what? Nobody knew. But General Donovan did. He was coming. And when he did, things wouldn't just change, they'd explode. The real question was, who would be standing when the dust settled? The day General Donovan arrived in town, there was no press conference, no flashing lights. Just a black SUV rolling slowly past the town's welcome sign, windows tinted, the kind of quiet that makes people nervous. Word spread fast. By the time he reached the city center, people had already gathered on sidewalks, whispering and pointing. Some recognized him instantly. His face had once been on magazine covers, his career decorated with honors. But now he wasn't here as a symbol. He was here for justice. Inside the police department, the mood shifted the moment his name appeared in the visitor log. Officers exchanged looks. The chief, a man who'd spent decades managing small-town drama, now faced something much bigger. Donovan didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He walked in with documents, timelines, witness statements, everything organized and precise. He spoke firmly, with the weight of both facts and reputation behind him. And then he asked a simple question. Asterisk, what are you going to do about your officer? Asterisk. The chief didn't answer right away. And that silence, it said more than any press release ever could. Outside, protesters and counter-protesters had taken to opposite sides of the courthouse steps. Signs filled the air. Asterisk, asterisk, justice for veterans, asterisk, 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 asterisk. Protect our police, asterisk, 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 end. Racial bias, asterisk, asterisk. It wasn't just about Reed anymore. It had become something larger. A symbol of all the stories that never made headlines. People who felt unseen now had a voice, and those who had turned a blind eye were being forced to look. Meanwhile, inside Reed's small home, the old veteran sat at his kitchen table, watching it all unfold on TV. A box sat beside him, full of letters from soldiers he'd mentored, photos from battlefields most people never saw. He didn't say much, but his eyes were steady. He knew something was coming, something big. And then came the notice. A public town hearing, announced last minute, with both Donovan and the police chief listed on the agenda. No one knew what would be said, but everyone knew this. The entire town would be watching, and nothing after that night would ever be the same. The town hall was packed, every seat taken, walls lined with people standing shoulder to shoulder, some holding signs, others just watching with tight lips and folded arms. Cameras rolled quietly in the corners, streaming the event live. Everyone had come expecting a confrontation. What they didn't expect was who walked in next. Just as General Donovan stepped up to the microphone, the back doors opened, and in walked another figure in uniform. But it wasn't from the military. It was internal affairs. A state-level investigator, sent quietly by the governor's office, holding a thick folder. He didn't say a word at first, just handed the folder to the town council president. Whispers rippled across the room. Donovan paused, eyes narrowing slightly. He hadn't expected this. Not yet. The council president looked stunned. She flipped through the papers with growing alarm. Inside were not just details about Officer Cole's recent actions, but a string of past complaints. Unreported use of force, minor cover-ups, racial bias training skipped, internal reports mysteriously closed. And it wasn't just Cole. A pattern stretched across the department, a quiet network of officers protecting each other, bending rules, and erasing incidents before they reached the public. Now it was bigger than one man. This was systemic, and it had a paper trail. Gasps echoed through the hall. Even those who had defended the department fell into silence. The police chief, sitting stiff in the front row, looked pale. He tried to speak, but the council president raised her hand. "We're not done," she said, her voice steady. "Everyone deserves the truth." Donovan, now back at the mic, looked directly at the officers seated along the wall. "This was never about vengeance," he said. "It's about accountability." But then, another surprise. A young woman in the crowd stood up, nervous, clutching a photo. "That's my brother," she said, voice trembling. "He had a run-in with Cole last year. No one ever listened." She wasn't the only one. 3 more hands went up. The story wasn't just unfolding, it was unraveling. And what lay underneath wasn't just about one bad cop, it was about a broken system that had kept people silent for far too long. The hearing room fell into a tense silence. You could hear every shuffle, every cough, every whisper. The stories kept coming. One by one, people stood up. A teenage boy talked about being stopped while biking home, shoved without cause. An older woman described being ignored when she tried to file a complaint months ago. These weren't just isolated moments. They painted a picture, one that could no longer be denied. The police chief finally rose, trying to steady his voice, but the weight of what had been revealed was too heavy to brush aside. "We make mistakes," he said. "Some officers will be disciplined." But his words rang hollow. General Donovan stepped forward again, his face calm but firm. "Discipline isn't enough," he said. "There needs to be reform. There needs to be accountability. And most of all, there needs to be respect for everyone." And just when it seemed like the moment had peaked, the final twist landed. The investigator from Internal Affairs took the mic. He cleared his throat and read aloud a detail no one had expected. Officer Cole's body camera footage from that day hadn't just been shut off, it had been intentionally deleted. But what he revealed next stunned the entire room. A backup copy had been found. Unedited, buried deep in the department's system. It had been mislabeled under a false case number. Someone had tried to hide it, and failed. The footage played on the projector, raw, real, and undeniable. You saw Reed calmly explaining who he was. You saw him reaching slowly for his ID. You heard Cole's voice, sharp, dismissive, and escalating without cause. No resistance, no threat, just power being abused in plain sight. The crowd sat frozen. By the time the clip ended, even some officers looked away. Within days, Officer Cole was officially charged and removed from the force. The police chief resigned. A special oversight board was formed to review past complaints. And Mr. Reed, he still stayed quiet, still watered his lawn each morning. But something in the town had shifted. And just when people thought the story had ended, a letter arrived at City Hall, signed by General Donovan and dozens of high-ranking veterans. It called for a national review of veteran treatment in policing. What started with one man on a sidewalk had become something far bigger. A spark that lit a fire for change. In the weeks that followed, the town began to feel different. The protests quieted, replaced by community meetings where real conversations finally started happening. New officers were brought in, background checks tightened, and training programs rewritten with input from civil rights groups and veterans alike. What had once been a small-town police department now became an example of what change could look like when people were held accountable. Mr. Reed never asked for any of it. He didn't want the attention. But he did show up, quietly, to the first town hall after the reforms passed. People stood when he entered, not for drama, but out of respect. He nodded and took his seat, still wearing the same faded jacket, still the same quiet man who had carried dignity through every storm life threw at him. General Donovan eventually returned to his base, but before he left, he met with Reed one last time. No cameras, no statements, just two old soldiers sitting on a porch, talking like they always had. Their friendship, forged in war, tested in peace, was still standing. As for the young woman who spoke at the hearing, she later helped start a local support network for people who had experienced police misconduct. It grew fast, not just in their town, but across neighboring cities too. Her courage had sparked something, just like Reed's calm defiance had. The story ended not with anger, but with awareness. A community that once looked the other way had finally opened its eyes. People learned that real change doesn't always come from noise. Sometimes it comes from someone simply doing the right thing when it matters most. And maybe that's the lesson here.